drive when I was 16, probably because I was too caught up in adolescent depression to be bothered. At the time, I hated relying on my mom to drive me anywhere, but public transportation wasn't much better. I'd get bored waiting for the bus, and the cost of taxis or asking friends for rides felt like too much. So I had two ways of getting around: walking and hitchhiking. I walked a lot. 2 miles to school if the bus didn't show up, 3 miles to a friend's house. I took long walks at night, sometimes with my dog, to sort out whatever crisis I was dealing with. Walking was free, flexible, and felt good to sort out the current crisis. If I got tired, or I was running late, or had too far to go, I'd stick out my thumb. I don't remember my first ride, but before long, I was hitchhiking all over DC, mostly alone. Over the years, I hitchhiked to Florida from DC, across the US twice, partway up the east coast of Australia, and once to a job interview on Cape Cod when the bus was too slow. I think I did it to avoid the anxiety of the interview. Hitchhiking gave me control that buses or friends' cars did not. By 19, hitchhiking had become second nature. I'd learned how to read people, how to safely get out of a bad ride, and how to make it work. I'd get tired of walking, or realize I was running late, or have farther to go than I wanted to walk, and I just wanted to get to a place quickly as I could without putting anyone out. So I'd stick out my thumb. It felt normal and comfortable. Hitchhiking also broadened my understanding of people. Most people were incredibly kind and routinely interesting. Plus, I wanted to have stories to prove that I was interesting too. Hitchhiking was easy and cheap, but it started to feel too routine. I wanted something more, something beyond the ordinary. I was in a transitional phase, returning to college after dropping out again, and it felt like now or never. I was still building up my interesting person resume, and I was on the prowl for something that hadn't been tried by everyone my age. That's when I decided to hitch a plane from Boston to DC. Leslie, a fellow hitchhiker, had suggested it. Now, she hadn't done it herself, nor did she know anyone who had done it, but she thought it was totally possible. So I decided to give it a test run. If it worked, Leslie and I would hitch a plane later that summer to Los Angeles. Leslie had said that most airports had small terminals for 2 to 4 seater planes that flew routinely between cities. All I had to do, she said, was find a pilot and ask for a ride. Simple, right? In hindsight, I probably didn't fit the part of someone looking for a plane ride. My appearance screamed begging for loose change. With ratty jeans, sandals, dirty feet, and a huge backpack, I didn't exactly look like a frequent flyer. But I sat quietly in the terminal, trying to blend in with the businessmen in suits, waiting for the right pilot to come by. The pilots weren't in uniforms. No suits here. More the scruffy bush pilot kind of look. I hesitated with a couple, maybe not liking their vibe or losing courage. The first guy I approached took one look at me after hearing my question and plainly said, "That's against the law." Undeterred, I walked to the next pilot. He laughed and said it was illegal, but I pressed on. "I won't tell anyone." I insisted, he hesitated, then agreed. Before I knew it, I was climbing into a small 2-seater Cessna with a mail drop pilot heading to DC. The flight was at night, the sky was clear, and as we neared New York City, we flew low enough to circle around the Statue of Liberty, one of the most surreal moments of my life. Saying it was awe-inspiring or instilled a deep love of my country in 1974 is stretching it, but it was incredibly beautiful. We continued flying low enough for me to see the multitudes of city lights that flank the eastern seaboard from Boston to DC, and arrived at the Baltimore-Washington airport at some point very early in the morning. The pilot took me back to his apartment. We exchanged pleasantries, invitations were politely declined, and I ended up sleeping on his living room floor. I do not remember much about the next morning except waking up not sure if I was in Baltimore or Northeast Washington. So I walked left and I went to the interstate and I stuck out my thumb and I found my way home. I continued hitchhiking for another 5 or 6 years, though that was the only time I ever successfully hitched a plane. Later that summer, Leslie and I tried to hitch rides to the West Coast, where I was supposed to catch a flight to Australia. We got kicked out of 2 airports by the police, but the experience taught me to love travel and to love meeting new people along the way. I ultimately ended up getting to LA for my flight by hitchhiking along with my 13-year-old brother, but that's another story for another day. Even now, I can't resist the urge to pursue an adventure, to say yes to the unknown, and I'm still building my interesting person resume.